welcome back. And as was promised yesterday, we saw the first part of an interview with Prime Minister Dean Barrow, which I had recorded when in Guatemala on Friday. And so we had the first part on Monday that showed his responses to issues pertaining to Belize and Guatemala. And the second part of the issue looks at a number of other issues that I got the opportunity to ask him about. We looked at integration, both with Central America and CARICOM, and some of the priorities in CARICOM. And on the local front, we asked a bit about the PUP leadership, asked him to weigh in on that. He talked a bit about the UDP leadership that is eventually to come, the change that is eventually to come, and also on his relations with Lord Michael Ashcroft. So all of that is going to be in this segment, and we can take a look at that now. Now I want to move into some of the other pressing issues at the moment. And one observation I made yesterday was you had a little time to informally chit-chat with U.S. Vice President Joe Biden before going into the National Theater. Have you had any opportunity to be able to discuss the correspondent banking relations, and what has been the conversation?
Yes, I approached him directly about that. Fortunately, I'd known him before, interacted with him in a couple of meetings, and he is a wonderfully gregarious man. Really has a very sunshiny type personality, and is easy to talk to. Nothing stiff about him, very amenable. And he right away said that he was aware, I made the point that it was an issue I'd already raised directly with the president, that we had gotten a meeting for the governor of the central bank and the U.S. Treasury in consequence of the president's promise to intervene, but that the situation had in fact deteriorated. He promised to look into it, to talk to people at the Treasury, to help us keep this very much on the front burner. I told him that because I knew yesterday that we have already secured pretty much all the appointments we were seeking, and so I will go to Washington the week after next, and I'm very pleased to report that we are getting appointments at extremely high levels, but his willingness and his promise, his commitment to, as it were, weigh in on the matter and try to help us to force a resolution was extremely welcome. And as I said, everything I've seen of Vice President Biden tells me that if he makes that sort of a commitment, he's the kind who will keep it. So that alone was worth coming to the inauguration, the opportunity to talk to Biden. I don't want to in any way downplay the importance, symbolic and practical, of being at Morales' inauguration, but in terms of that pressing issue for us, it was excellent to have had the opportunity to talk to Vice President Biden about it.
Okay. And keeping within the region, one of the issues of recent is looking at CICA integration. We had the Cuban migrant issue that arose, and we saw Costa Rica's president's specific reaction questioning Guatemala and Belize's commitment to Central American integration. Even if we were to look at those who were present at the inauguration last night, what would you say is the current status of the integration process?
I think it is as well as can be. The course of integration, like the course of true love, never did run smooth, and the world is replete with examples of that. Look at what's happening in Europe now. The whole migrant crisis is in fact revealing all sorts of cracks in the European integration movement, and Britain's a position where there's going to be a referendum, and where one hopes not, but where there may well be a vote to opt out, in my view, would then presage all sorts of negative ramifications for the EU. In CARICOM, again, we're going along, and I think we've done well. We've reached. I was saying no, the comparison with CARICOM, but even there are still a number of outstanding issues. So if there are problems, perhaps ongoing problems, but individual problems that are thrown up by particular circumstances with CICA, that's not a reason for any to adopt a position of pessimism, to start employing doom and gloom rhetoric. You try to deal with the immediate issue and you move on. And in fact, as I understand it, there is progress being made now on the Cuban migrants issue. So I hope that President Solis is reassured and has in fact emerged from the state of high dudgeon in which he found himself at that last CICA meeting.
Okay. And then moving into CARICOM, you assume the pro tem chairmanship. Let's talk about what you hope to achieve in the next 6 months and some of the priorities.
Well, big on the agenda is regional security. In terms of the way the world is, we have not yet experienced anything like we've seen happening globally with far too much frequency, but we need to prepare. We need to be preemptive. There are, believe it or not, some cases, not very many, of Caribbean nationals having gone to join ISIS. I won't get into any details, but regional security, apart from what's happening internally with our drugs and gangs, regional security from the point of view of the possible threat source to international terrorism is key. And the meeting in Belize next month will look long and hard at that. I'm hoping that we can make some additional progress in terms of getting more CARICOM countries to join onto the appellate jurisdiction of the CCJ. The correspondent banking issue. Belize is moving well ahead in terms now of my trip to Washington and the appointments I have there, but that is also a CARICOM-wide issue because there are other jurisdictions, several other CARICOM jurisdictions where they're experiencing the same difficulties, perhaps not quite as pronounced, not quite as acute as our situation in Belize, but that's also going to be big. I will be hoping to report on whatever progress I would have made, but there clearly is going to be a need for us as a region to maintain a full court press to try to preserve correspondent banking relationships. So those really are the headline issues that I'm hoping can be addressed during my 6-month chairmanship.
I want to bring it back to the local level for just a couple more issues. One is looking at the People's United Party Leadership Convention taking place at the end of this month. Any thoughts on the candidates that are running and who may potentially be the leader?
I won't, that's such an internal, so intensely and so completely an internal matter that I won't venture any opinions. I quite frankly.
Were you surprised when the past leader re-entered the race once again?
I was. But again, my surprise does not necessarily imply a criticism. He says that people approached him, and if there was indeed a huge groundswell asking for him to return, then one understands. I have no criticism to make of any of the three candidates. They're part of our democracy, a central part of our democracy. For God's sake, I mean, their party dominated the political life of the country for years and years and years and years, and one wants to see them return to a state of good political health. So I wish them well and hope that that it won't end up being quite as nasty as the Facebook campaign seems to suggest. But in the end, it doesn't matter. They will get over it, and whatever healing needs to be done, they will have pretty much 5 years to do that. So I think they'll be fine.
And in terms of lesson learned for the eventual leadership challenge that will take place in your own party?
Well, you know, we're having a convention next month, which is not the convention, a sort of interim convention. And thereafter, we're going to try to get a dispensation from that national convention in March, which is, the national convention is the supreme organ of the party, so that we will not have to hold another convention in 2 years' time. We will ask, and we fully expect this to be done, that the date for the next national convention be fixed, not the exact date, certainly the month of January of 2020. So by the end of January of 2020, I mean, this is miles ahead, but it's just as well to get it all sorted out. There will be a convention to elect the new leader of the UDP. I want to go by January so that whoever emerges as the leader can become prime minister and have the 9 months or so to, in fact, read the 2020 budget, prepare the party for the general elections at the end of that year. So I can tell you that while it's a long ways away, already we have a sense of who the aspirants are, and I think their exploratory campaigning has already started. And so it'll be some interesting times ahead.
And I suppose you don't have any favorites in this process?
No, but seriously, Marley, I've already said that I hope that we'll have a convention in Queen Square before the national convention in 2020. So we would have that hopefully by the middle of 2019. I don't think anybody will challenge my sister, who's really been the person who's run the constituency for the last 2 elections. And so I would hope that she would already have been installed, elected, whatever, as the new standard bearer for Queen Square. And so she will pick her delegates. She's the one that the aspirants for leadership will have to lobby and court, and she will determine which of those that enter the lists she will support. I will have nothing to do with it. If I'm around and have health and strength, I will simply attend the convention and cast my individual vote, but I'll have nothing to do with the Queen Square delegates.
And my final question has to do with the BTL settlement and your expectations in terms of when the actual price perhaps will be known and how you intend to pay.
clearly, sometime this year, I would think by the middle of the year. I've said we're not exactly rolling in money these days because of various reasons, including the huge drop-off in Petrocaribe flows and the reduction in oil prices, which that reduction has pretty much put paid to our own oil industry, our own export of petroleum via BNE. It is going to be difficult to find the money to make the payment. It strikes me that we'll have to take on a little more debt in terms of domestic debt now by way of treasury bills to raise that money. But we fully intend to discharge our obligations. That's the honorable thing to do.
Some have looked at the settlement that was made with BTL and obviously some of the current proposals for investments and have considered it to be a softening of relationships between yourself and Lord Michael Ashcroft. Is that the case?
Yes, because the joining of issue over BTL was a huge thing, and the settlement is therefore extremely consequential. I've said that I can put it no higher. The company PIL, Ports Investment Limited, I'm not sure what the acronym stands for, that has the Port Loyola port in receivership, the cargo port. That company is prepared to at least explore the possibility and the feasibility of doing a cruise port at Port Loyola. That was the site of the original intention when Carnival was involved. Now, it is PIL, it is not Lord Ashcroft, Michael Ashcroft as such, but clearly he's a moving force. And if we can, if something can happen there, we would absolutely welcome it. He's already said to me that with the decks having been cleared in terms of the BTL issue, he will, in any case, be prepared to invest more in the cargo side of things, in the container port. And you know, that is clearly very much in need of additional equipment and a modernization. And we welcome that. It is clear, and I've said this to him, and he now knows this, that there's no intention, as they might have feared on the part of government, to try to go after the port. That's out of the question. So in that sort of a circumstance, his interests or concerns that he's involved with, their willingness to put money in the cargo port and to look at the cruise port is something that we welcome.
Okay. Well, Prime Minister, I've taken up a lot of your time,
Not
so I
at
want
all.
to thank you
Enjoyed
for covering a wide range of issues.
Thank you.
And there you had it, the second part of our interview with Prime Minister Dean Barrow. Of course, this will continue to be a part of our conversations, because some of the points that he made will be great food for thought.
Absolutely, and several things that stick out to me. Looking first at the regional level, the issues that he has explained to be a priority for CARICOM at this time will definitely be a part of the conversation within a couple of weeks when CARICOM meets in Placentia.
Yeah.
So I think that those are definitely relevant issues that we can see more conversation and more dialogue taking place. Yesterday we had the conversation about Caribbean integration. The point was brought up about security. When he mentioned the Caribbean recruits for ISIS, I mean, I think we've been looking at the issue of ISIS from an observer standpoint, not necessarily looking at what might be taking place in our own backyards. I think that was definitely an eye-opening portion of the conversation. And it's very realistic these days with technology and access to information. Anybody can jump on a bandwagon for anything. So that was an eye-opening moment. And I think the correspondent banking issue, which he is meant to travel, I think, within this week or next week, to be able to address, is definitely one that we will continue to talk about. And the leadership, well, a deadline of January 2020.
Yeah, I think
for himself, that is.
A lot of people started speculating who's next.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Well, I think it was interesting to see the Prime Minister say for himself, it's going to get interesting. We've seen that with the PUP leadership. And no joke aside, I mean, it's funny sometimes when we think of how it plays out. But this is important because the leader of either of these political parties will eventually be the leader of our nation. So we should pay attention to it and perhaps try our very best to look at all the silly conversations that take place and look at the merit of why we should pay attention to these leadership conventions.
Yeah, I think you said something just now. You said interesting, because things can get interesting weird or interesting really going in the right direction. And I think it's whether we're able, especially at a time when you're looking at some of the debates happening in the US, and look at how positions and where people stand on particular issues are such a critical part of the conversation, that we tend to veer more towards party loyalty than actually looking at the ramifications for the nation and what it really means. And I think that's the interesting thing for me.
You press such an important, I was ready to wrap up and then you press this button, but it is so important, and I think it speaks to our political maturity. I think we need to pressure politicians to be able to talk about issues. I enjoy watching the debates because you hear thoughts and perspectives and plans and policies as to how some of the major issues would be addressed when it comes to the United States and the debates that are taking place. All I hear in Belize when it comes to leadership conventions is whose alliance is with who, and who constitutionally should be next leader. And I don't hear what either of these leaders can bring to the table for the people, because that's really the ultimate goal that they have. They want to lead the nation. So what will they do for the people that they want to lead? And I think until we as the public, the voting public, can demand that from our politicians, then we'll continue to see the pettiness and the silliness that takes place.
And I think one thing, final wrap for me, has to do with the fact that it's more maintaining for status quo and the establishment, where you're not able to have the outsiders really come in and shake up the party, even if you believe in a particular philosophy. But I think a big part of it has been that we don't have a left and a right, or a conservative and a liberal in terms of the stance and the political views and the philosophical views. We've not had an articulation to know whether a party is more conservative or more liberal, where they're going in terms of their
what
direction.
Their ideologies are,
Right.
But we haven't forced them to it.
Yeah.
We haven't forced them to it. And I think, like I said, it's a political maturity that we as the voting population also need to look at. And some may argue that it will never change. And I think that's a very disappointing way of looking at it. But I have hope.
Yep.
All right.
Can't lose that.
All right, so let's get moving into the rest of our show. We got to take a break, and as we mentioned, we're going to be talking about comprehensive sexuality education in Belize's secondary schools. So we'll have that after the break. Stay tuned.